Welcome to Doc's Lab and our second Master Series. Welcome to Doc's Lab and our second Master Series. I do believe this is the 103rd video in our second Master Series, the 52nd video on basic processors, the 15th video on sculpting processors, and the 5th video on noise. And in this way, we're going to apply noise with a sampler. So basically, we've talked about using automation, and then we talked about using a gate or expander, which are the two best ways to apply the noise. But there's a third way that you can experiment with, and this is using like a sampler. And it's a pretty simple concept, so we're not going to get really in deep into it. I'm going to kind of show you a little bit and then let you experiment with it, because the concept's pretty simple. The first thing you need to be able to do is have something like my studio will edit a piece of audio with Melodyne. So I'll select edit it with Melodyne or some kind of software similar to Melodyne, which will put it on here for pitch correction. And then once it's set up to edit with Melodyne, it will have it in a MIDI format laying on top of the audio, which I can just drag onto a VST track that's a MIDI track. So then I have this MIDI information on another track, correct? Now, the idea is once you've got that information on the track, what I'll do is I'll choose a sampler, like this sample one. And it's set up, you can put it on all the keys, but I'm just putting it on C3 here. So I have it on C3, so this is the piece of audio that I cleaned up a little bit. And if you look at it, it's going basically from where the audio starts, where it stops, where it starts again, where it stops, where it starts again. And you can look at kind of the envelope of sound of where it starts, where it stops, where it starts, and where it stops. Now you can get a little bit more detailed in this, and you can also set up the notes to go like you want them to be at this level, along here. For here you want a little quieter. For here you want a little bit louder. For here you want a little bit louder. For here you want a little quieter. So you would break up these MIDI notes and then adjust the volumes accordingly on the MIDI track. But a lot of times these dropouts are the biggest areas you got to worry about because of the sound that's coming through, because it's delicate work, and the more out front the track is, it's obvious that you want to be more careful with it. But the majority of the work that you'll be doing is stuff that is doing analog emulation on each individual track or on a whole, or you're doing sound sculpting, things like that, that's farther back in the mix. So basically, you'll have like a VST instrument, like this is my sampler directly out of my Studio 1.3. Now, the understanding of this is most of the parameters I'm not messing with, but a couple of things. Like we talked about when we were using the gate and the expander, the attack and release, the decay and the sustain, that envelope of sound to where it comes on and goes off and things like that. The more MIDI notes you put on there to follow each one of these individual envelopes, that the closer you can get to following the sound. But on this one, I just have it following these basic three areas that you can see. These three envelopes I see as basically three envelopes of sound for a very simple explanation. And then I have adjusted the attack to about 30 milliseconds and release to about 30 milliseconds. I've got sustain up up at 0 dB, and the decay I don't have any on it right at this moment. But those are the most simple parameters on your sampler to adjust. But there are tons of probably parameters that you can use to map it out really cool. So take your time, study your sampler and things like that. And also when you get into the actual MIDI that you've got all kinds of areas, modulation, pitch bend, aftertouch, that you can add more parameters to it. You can get in there and add things like the amplitude, the pan of the gain, and things like that. All these parameters that are available on this MIDI instrument or that sampler are available here to add. If I want to add this right here, I add it there, and then I've got a master gain that I can adjust accordingly going across here. So I can adjust the gain to go up, down, and follow the envelope of sound a lot closer, almost like I'm doing automation, but working with the MIDI notes. Does that make sense? Working with the MIDI notes, the automation, and the sampler itself to follow those envelopes of sound closer and closer and closer. So the more you understand your sampler and the tools that are available for you to work with them, don't worry, we're going to get into all this stuff later, but for now, that the work you're probably going to be doing is very simple when dealing with noise, because the biggest point is probably getting it set up like this, and you'll be able to hear this somewhat when I play this, and then adjusting the volume. So if I bring this volume all the way down, and then I adjust to play this, do your magic, make me sound good. 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 It's pretty simple to see that for the most part, once you get it to where at the main parts that you've got noise but it's not too loud, that you're basically going to probably start working with your ADSR on the amplitude and start working that until it follows the contour a little bit better. But you can get in there, like I said, and actually go into here and actually work with automation in here as far as this is concerned, to make dots and do automation with your master gain all the way along there, just like we're doing automation at the beginning. But the more work you do here, the more time consuming it is. And the idea is that as you go from one tool to the next, that by the time you get to the sampler, that it's probably pretty far back in the mix, and you're just trying to get this, if you could get them on the same note so you don't have to mess with it too much. So it comes on here, it goes off there, it comes on there, it goes off there, and trying to keep it pretty simple. And then just go in there and adjust your attack and release and your envelope of sound, the parameters that you have available to adjust it in there. And then by the time you get it down to the level it's supposed to be, it probably should be fine. But it can simplify things. So this is the third way of applying your noise. It's automation, then gate and expander, and then down to sampler in a way like this to get the farther back in the mix that you might be looking for simpler ways to get it done. And so, or you got a complicated mix that has a lot of stuff in it, that a lot of it's going to get hidden, and it's not like 3 instruments that everything's going to be really obvious. There's going to be a lot of blending because there's a lot of stuff going on in the mix. And so you can let it come up a little bit, and you don't have to be worried so much about it, coming out in the mix and there's some noise standing out, because you'll have it down far enough to where you don't have to worry about it. So basically, that your sampler is the next tool to apply your noise. And it's a pretty simple application to where you just get those MIDI notes on there and then just start working your ADSR, and then you can work at a little bit more with the tools you have, working with MIDI notes and things like that, and other parameters you have on your sampler. But by the time you decide you're going to use the sampler for the application, that the work should be pretty simple. And if it starts getting really complicated, you're going to want to switch to a gate or expander, or you're going to want to go to straight automation. So I hope that helps a lot, and I hope that made it very simple so I didn't make it very complicated, and I will see you in the next video.